Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster. Welcome back to the Margiela series where we're exploring every single runway presentation that Martin Margiela produced at his eponymous house. Today we find ourselves in fall-winter 1998. This is part 2 of the flat collection. We've seen them do a part 1 and a part 2 for a previous set of seasons in the spring and fall of 1997 with the Stockman dummy collections. This one is a continuation of the themes that were laid out last season in spring-summer 1998. This is a really unusual show. I realize that I say that a lot. It's really true with this one. This show took place only one day after Martin's first presentation with the House of Hermes. He's been working there since last season, but this is the first time that he has shown as the creative director for the ready-to-wear line at Hermes. Again, we have some incredible content for that on the way, but for now we are here in this show, and it's important that we realize that Martin is, for the first time in his career, splitting his time between full-time work at Hermes and full-time work at his own house. There's some loose documentation that implies that Martin was helping to fulfill contract work while he was the assistant for Jean-Paul Gaultier, so he is used to having to change his vision to suit the needs of different houses, but this is the first time where he is having to do that full-time and fully encapsulate both houses. And I think that was a little bit difficult for him to pick up on at first. Originally, Martin didn't even want to work for Hermes. When they reached out to him at first, he didn't like the idea at all. His co-founder, Jenny Meerens, was actually the one that pushed him to take the meeting with Hermes and sort of encouraged him to take that position. And because he is now probably just really stressed trying to split his time, Jenny understood that he felt a little bit overwhelmed and so helped out a lot with the staging and the presentation of this collection at the Maison. Fall-winter 1998 became a very memorable show in the Maison's history thanks to their 3 collaborators for the actual presentation itself. And that was the legendary photographer Mark Borthwick, British stylist Jane Howe, and art researcher and writer Sidney Picasso. Just to be upfront with everybody, we're going to be very light on the clothes this season. The actual garments themselves are largely a rehash of stuff that the Maison has done previously and that we've covered in a whole lot of detail. There's a few new garments, but not many. The thing that makes this show so memorable is the artfulness of the presentation itself. And since the extended episodes, the whole purpose of the extended episodes for the Patreon supporters is that we go into super minute detail about the clothes themselves and how the themes are changing in the actual stitches and the darts, that's not going to be one for this season. I guess I could find a way to sort of stretch that out and force there to be a Patreon extended episode, but I feel like that would be a little bit dishonest. So for this one, I am just not doing an extended episode. This is all of the content that there is for fall-winter 1998. That said, though, you should go support the Patreon. I am only able to produce this series if I have a very strong, solid base of financial support. And that is what the Patreon is all about. I hope this content is valuable enough to you that you understand the need for financial support. Okay, so there is a piece of information that I have come across since I began this series on Margiela that has pretty fundamentally changed my outlook on the house. Here's the deal. For a number of years when the brand started out, the name of the brand itself was Martin Margiela. So like on the Paris Fashion Week schedule, it would read like this: Martin Margiela, fall-winter 1992. That was pretty bizarre to me because I had only ever heard the house referred to as Maison Martin Margiela and then eventually getting changed under Galliano to Maison Margiela. We learned from the We Margiela documentary from Patrick Scallon, who was the communications director for the house, set up a dichotomy between the 2 different names, Martin Margiela and Maison Martin Margiela. The first was to delineate the projects, usually just runway show presentations, that were there under the creative direction of Martin. Maison Martin Margiela was to specify separate events and exhibitions and projects that were by the entire team. It was more about the work of the team as a whole rather than just of the creative direction of Martin. An example of a Maison Martin Margiela project early on was the bacteria exhibit that happened in the Netherlands. There is also some crazy content coming about that. You should be so excited. So since Martin was so incredibly busy getting his footing at Hermes, this was actually shown on the presentation invites as Maison Martin Margiela. Now, eventually the house did switch to just being Maison Martin Margiela. Maybe that's because the ethos of the entire team working together to accomplish things became much more important and prevalent in their process. Maybe it's because that was important in the process all along and they just realized it and wanted to acknowledge it. This project here, because it is a product of the Maison, is not better or worse. I think we're kind of past the point of using overly simple value assessments for these kinds of things, but it is noticeably different. And we shall see how. Okay, So we need to cover a really crucial element of the Maison's work here in order to understand how this show is so different. I promise this is all relevant. It's not going to feel like it at first. Hang with me. Fashion is an art form that functions really differently than any other. With painting, things are, it's art, so it's still complex, but it's much more simple. If you're in a museum looking at an original painting, you are here, the painting is there, the painting is communicating with you, affecting you in whatever way it will, and then you go out into the world and maybe your life is changed by what you've seen, but there is just still this thing here and you here. Fashion is created by a designer or a team of designers. It is then created by a separate group of people. It then goes out into stores where you can see it contextualized in lots of different ways. And then it is purchased by a person and incorporated into their life. The element of personal style adds this whole other separate, confusing element to fashion that makes it a very unique art form. So the reason that this show here, Fall Winter 1998, is so different is because they added in yet another conflicting, crazy, unpredictable element to the way that fashion comes to the public. So we have a group of designers designing the collection, produced by a separate group of people, given to 3 artists who decided to present it in some bizarre extra thing. It's then sent to stores and then bought by people. 5 elements instead of 4. So big deal, right? Like they got some collaborators to help them with the presentation. That's not unusual. Well, I think the reason that this becomes so important is because it really exemplifies the separation between Martin Margiela and Maison Martin Margiela and why those two things had to become one entity. Martin, as an artist and fashion designer, more leaned on his ability to lead other people into a vision that they could then interpret. Really a game of telephone almost is maybe a way of thinking about it. And there is a precedent for this in art. There are tons of contemporary artists who have carried this out, like Jeff Koons and Ai Weiwei, and even Andy Warhol, where the instructions are given out and they're able to be executed by other people. And really, this has been something that has existed in art from the very beginning. I mean, spoiler alert, Michelangelo didn't do this by himself. And there's even good precedent for this in other Margiela collections. In spring-summer 1993, the Black and White show, they purchased clothes from a closing theater company in Paris and then overdyed those garments using one technique with one shot. And then they just released the collection, whatever it was. They set up the process, allowed it to be executed, and used what they had. Another example in the Salvation Army show where their technique for creating the collection resulted in some of the garments being shrunk so much that they couldn't fit them onto adults, so they had to incorporate children into the show. But here in this show, they really exemplified that process. As always, they are bringing you the process and helping you to understand the clothes better by understanding how all of this art comes to be. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 contributors to this show. Sydney Picasso is the daughter-in-law of Pablo Picasso, who is an art researcher and writer. She created a continuous ribbon that was apparently extremely long and had text written on it, as well as a pamphlet that was handed out to people, probably in the form of show notes about the show itself and about the Maison at large. As people entered into the venue space, the ribbon was cut and tied around everyone's wrists individually, kind of like the way they do for concerts. Mark Borthwick created a short film for the presentation. This mostly features abstract stuff involving chairs and the models in various states of dress and undress. The more important part to me, though, is when we see 3 of the models wearing the clothes and talking simultaneously. For our copy of this film, we can't hear exactly what they're saying, but this is a pretty revolutionary repositioning of the role of model. Usually, the model is silent. So back then it was fairly similar. There were a few things that were different. It was much more standard, especially at Paris Fashion Week, for models to be kind of like cutesy and sashaying and doing cute little things or smoking cigarettes. But even at that time when the idea was that it's like, oh, her personality can shine through so much more, I don't feel like that's really what was happening. They were telling the models backstage, look charming, be pretty, act cute, which of course a forced cuteness does not give us any more insight into who the model is in the first place. It's just exactly that, it's a forced cuteness. But here we're seeing those models talking simultaneously, wearing the collection and just being themselves. And the Maison has had an interesting conflict as far as the use of their models is concerned. From some models literally falling down during presentations, to the inclusion of neighborhood kids during presentations, to couples walking the runway together unexpectedly or planned, I'm not really sure, to sometimes entire families that ended up having to walk the runway together because a kid was just being fussy backstage and needed his mom. The personalities of models has always been a priority for the Maison, while still maintaining this contradictory stance that the clothes should speak for themselves and that the models are so unimportant that they should often be masked. I'm not really sure how to explain that contradiction in a way that makes sense, but it is a tension that has become a hallmark of the house. And here in this collection, Mark allows the personality of the models to take precedent by recording them speaking and living, warts and all. As is often the case for Margiela's work, this emphasizes and praises the reality of how women are in the real world. The beauty of these women reminds us of the beauty of the women in our own lives. Last contributor, Jane Howe. Jane Howe is a stylist, and the reason that this show is so recognizable is because of her work. She produced these nightmare fuel marionettes that modeled the collection at the show itself. After Mark's short film had ended, a walkway dropped down from the ceiling and 15 life-size marionettes emerged wearing the pieces from the collection, controlled by 2 puppeteers wearing all black. Lately, the Maison has started experimenting more and more with the removal of models altogether, and this is an extension of that idea. We remember that in part 1 of the flat collection, spring-summer 1998, the actual presentation itself just had men holding up hangers holding the clothes, which is the way that it would be in a store, right? Here with the marionettes, we see them as if they're on store mannequins that are also somehow nightmarishly able to walk around. We do, unfortunately, only see a few small developments with the clothes in this collection. We see a precursor to one of the more famous Margiela pieces ever that we'll see many seasons later in this shirt jacket thing here. We also see some very clever flips on the garments that were established in part 1 of the flat collection, which are referred to as the envelope items. In my opinion, the most iconic piece that is added to the Margiela canon in this season is the coin purse glove bag. This is a piece that would end up being reissued for the H&M collaboration many years later. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, please go support the Patreon. This channel can only exist if people are supporting it. You get to join an awesome community and you get a lot of exclusive stuff. It's definitely worth joining and the support really would mean a ton to me. Ana ukhebukun. Man, my Arabic is so bad. Bye.